Jesus said that Elijah had already come back. Elijah himself, looking them in the face, answered that he had not. And even so, God promised to send him one more time, right before the end of the world. Because the last sentence God speaks in the entire Old Testament is not a blessing, it's a threat of total destruction. And this man, a man who, by the way, never actually died, is the only thing capable of stopping it. His name is Elijah. And those last words of God, the last ones before nearly 400 years of absolute silence, are these. God speaks through his prophet and says, "Behold, I am sending you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes." Stop there for a moment. Of all the men who walked through those pages, of all the patriarchs, all the kings, all the prophets who spoke and died and were buried, God points to one alone. And he doesn't say, "I will raise up someone like Elijah." He doesn't say, "I will send the spirit of another man." He says the name. He says Elijah, as if the man was still available, as if he were waiting somewhere, ready to return. And here's what almost no one tells you when they read that verse in church. The sentence doesn't end there. God explains what he's going to send him for, and the reason is so strange, so intimate, so far from what you'd expect, that it completely changes the way you read the whole story. He doesn't send him to do miracles. He doesn't send him to split the sky with fire. He sends him to do something much smaller and much harder than that. And in the next few minutes, you're going to understand exactly what and why only he could do it. Because there are three things that still don't fit. And I'm going to put them on the table right now, so you don't lose sight of them. The first, of all the prophets, of all the saints, of all the heroes of the Old Testament, why him specifically? What did this man have that no other man had? The second, that same Jesus who said Elijah had already come back in that very same conversation with John the Baptist, already dead and buried, said that Elijah is still yet to come, already came, and is going to come, both from the same mouth. And the third, perhaps the most unsettling of all, to this very day, at every Jewish birth, at every circumcision, a chair is reserved that no one ever sits in. It's set apart, untouched, waiting. And it's waiting for him. Three pieces that don't add up, and when they do add up, you're going to look at your own life differently. I promise you that. Before we go on, let me tell you something quick. No beating around the bush. If this is the first time you've come to this channel, welcome to the family. There's no pressure here at all. Stay and watch. And if you're already one of the ones who come back, one of the ones who's always here, do me the favor and leave me that like on trust, not because I'm asking you to, but because you and I both know that what we're building here, nobody else does quite like this. And if you don't like the video by the end, well, you take it back and that's it, no harm done. Fair. Let's keep going. To understand why God chooses this man and not another, you first have to understand who he was. And I'm not talking about his prophetic resume, I'm talking about his name. Because in the Bible, names are not labels, they are sentences. They are the person compressed into a few letters. His name in Hebrew is Eliyahu. And Eliyahu splits into two pieces. The first piece, Eli, means my God. The second piece, Yahu, is the short form of the sacred name, the unpronounceable name of God, YHWH. So his name in full means, my God is YHWH. Think about it. The man didn't have a pretty name. He had a flag nailed into his chest. Every time someone called him, every time they shouted, Eliyahu, down the street, they were proclaiming, without realizing it, a declaration of theological war. My God is the Lord, not Baal, not the idols of wood, the Lord. And that was no ordinary time to carry that name. Israel was ruled by a weak king married to a foreign queen who had imported the cult of Baal and turned it into the religion of the state. The prophets of the true God were hunted and killed. The people limped between two opinions, 1 foot on the Lord, 1 foot on the idol, unable to decide on either. It was a nation with its heart split in two. Remember that image. The heart split in two. You're going to need it later on. And in the middle of all that, a man appears alone, dressed in animal skins, with a leather belt, coming out of the desert as if the desert itself had spat him out for that mission. And he does something no other prophet dared to do. He challenges the 450 prophets of Baal to a duel of fire, in front of the whole nation, on the top of a mountain called Carmel. Picture the scene, because it was no ordinary day. They'd gone 3.5 years without a single drop of rain. 3.5 years. The ground was cracked into crusts, the streams dry, dead cattle strewn along the roads, and the dust rose with every step and clung to the throat. The whole nation was on the edge of famine, and everyone knew that this man from the desert had announced that drought in the name of the Lord. So when the prophet summons the people to the mountain, an entire crowd climbs up, hungry, desperate, not knowing whom to blame or whom to believe. And he plants himself in front of all of them and throws out the question that sums up his whole mission all at once. He raises his voice and shouts, "How long will you waver between two thoughts? If the Lord is God, follow him, and if Baal, then go after him." And the people, the text says, answered not a word. They stood mute, with their hearts still split in two, not daring to turn toward either side. You already know how it ends. The prophets of Baal shout, dance, cut themselves with knives, bleed for hours, and their God does not answer, because there's no one on the other side. And then the Tishbite repairs the fallen altar of the Lord, soaks it with water until the water overflows, and prays a single prayer. Short, no spectacle. And here's the part I want you to really hear, because hidden in that prayer is the whole key to this video. The prophet lifts his voice and says, "Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that this people may know that you are turning their heart back to yourself." And the fire falls. It falls from the sky and devours the sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones of the altar, and it licks up even the last drop of the water in the trench. And then what the prophet had really asked for happens. That whole mute, divided crowd, that a moment before wouldn't dare answer even one word, falls face down against the ground and shouts, now yes, with a single voice, "The Lord is God, the Lord is God." You see it. That was the real miracle. Not the fire. The fire was just the means. The miracle was that a people with a split heart, in an instant, turned entirely and came back. The hearts came back. That was the true work of that man. And notice what happens right after, because it's an image you're going to need later on. As soon as the hearts come back, the prophet climbs to the summit again, bows to the ground, and pleads. And for the first time in 3.5 years, a small cloud appears on the horizon, the size of a man's hand. And that cloud grows, and the sky darkens, and the rain comes down. The same sky he had closed as a sign of judgment now opens the moment the people come back. Hold on to that. Sky closed when the heart turns away. Sky open when the heart comes back. That equation is, deep down, what this whole story is about. That you are turning their heart back to yourself. That is the prophet's request. He doesn't ask for fire to win the duel. He asks for fire so the hearts will come back. And that idea, to return, to make a heart turn around and come back to God, is the heartbeat of the whole Hebrew Bible. And it has a name. The word is shuv. Shuv means to return, to come back, to turn around and walk back home. It's the word the prophets shout over and over when they beg the people to repent, because to repent in Hebrew is not to feel guilt. It's to turn your body around and go back the way you came, to return to God. And I want you to keep it, because in a moment, in the last promise of the Old Testament, you're going to see God put exactly that verb into the mission of the man he will send at the end. So burn this in, because it's the heart of everything. The mission of that man from the very first day from Mount Carmel was not to do miracles. It was to bring hearts back. That was always his trade, to make a people with a split heart turn around and come back. And I want you to hold on to that word, shov, to return. Because when we reach the end of the Old Testament, you're going to see God use that very idea to describe what the prophet will do at the end of time. It's the same work, the same mission, the same man. But for that man to be able to return in the future, something impossible has to happen first. He has to not die, and this is where his story separates from everyone else's. Because the second book of Kings tells the end of the Tishbite, and it's not an end. The prophet is walking with his disciple, and suddenly the account says that a chariot of fire appeared, and horses of fire, and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Picture that moment for a second. The two men are walking and talking, master and disciple, and suddenly the air tears open. Fire comes down from the sky in the shape of a chariot and horses between the two of them and separates them. And a tremendous wind, a whirlwind, wraps the prophet and rips him from the earth upward, and his disciple stays below, eyes fixed on the sky, shouting after him while the figure grows small and vanishes. And then, silence. The disciple is left alone on the bank, the wind still on his face, staring at the spot in the sky where his master had just disappeared. It doesn't say he got sick. It doesn't say he grew old and rested with his fathers, as it says of almost everyone else. There's no tomb. There's no headstone. There are no bones. The man was simply torn from this earth alive, without passing through death. And this is not a decorative detail. This is the mechanical, physical reason why God can promise to bring him back. Think about it coldly. Any other prophet, in order to return, would have to be resurrected. He would have to be pulled out of a tomb. But he never entered one. He is, let's say, on pause, retired but not deceased. And for that reason, and only for that reason, when God says, "I am sending you Elijah," he can say it in a sense he cannot say of anyone else. The man is still there, kept, waiting for the signal. Now, with those two pieces in hand, his name that means, "My God is the Lord," and his exit without death, we can open the verse that started it all. We can finally understand the why. Let's go to the last prophet of the Old Testament. His name was Malachi. And here's something beautiful that very few people notice. Malachi in Hebrew is not really a common proper name. Malachi means "my messenger." The last book of the Old Covenant is signed by "my messenger," and the theme of the whole book is precisely a messenger that God is going to send. Listen to what God says at the beginning of that book. "Behold, I send my messenger who will prepare the way before me." The Hebrew word for messenger there is malach. It's the same word that's sometimes translated as angel, because an angel is nothing more than that, a messenger who is sent. But here it's not talking about a winged being. It's talking about a man, a herald, someone who runs ahead of the king to announce that the king is already coming. So the people prepare the way, fill the potholes, straighten the road. And to understand why God closes his whole message talking about hearts and about families, you have to see who he was speaking to. The people Malachi is writing to were not a people at open war against God, like in the days of Baal. It was something sadder, and perhaps more like today. It was a tired people, cynical, disillusioned. They had come back from exile. They had rebuilt the temple with enormous sacrifice, and life was still hard, and inside their faith had gone cold. They didn't even fight with God anymore. They argued with him listlessly to his face. When God tells them he loves them, they answer him, according to the text, "In what way have you loved us?" When he rebukes them, they reply, "In what way have we dishonored you?" A people who no longer see what they're doing wrong, who answer God the way you answer an annoying stranger. And among the things God rebukes them for in that book, there's one that strikes right at the nerve of this video. God accuses them of breaking faith with the wife of their youth, of destroying their own homes, of tearing apart what he himself had joined together. And he says a very hard line. He says he hates that tearing, that violence against the family. Do you understand where this is going? The book that is going to end by promising that Elijah will turn the heart of the fathers toward the children is a book written to families that were splitting apart from within at that very moment. The wound that Elijah comes to heal was already open and bleeding the day God made the promise. And at the end of the book, in the last lines, God puts a face to that messenger. He gives him a name, and he says, "Behold, I am sending you the prophet Elijah before the day of the Lord comes, great and terrible." There it is. The messenger who prepares the way is Elijah. The herald who runs ahead of the king is the man who went up in the whirlwind. And now comes the question that gives this whole thing its title. What for? Why does he send him? What does the herald have to do before that great and terrible day arrives? And God's answer is one of the tenderest and most surprising lines in all of Scripture. Pay attention to every word. God says the prophet will come to turn the heart of the fathers toward the children and the heart of the children toward the fathers. That's it. That is the mission. Not an army, not fire from the sky, not judgment, reconciliation. Elijah comes back to repair the oldest and most painful fracture there is, the fracture between generations. The father who doesn't speak to the son who turned his back on the father, broken families, forgotten covenants, the faith of the grandparents that the grandchildren abandoned. He comes back to turn hearts back. Remember the word I asked you to keep? Shove. Here it is, written in the last line of the Old Testament. The same verb with which the prophets begged the people to return, now placed as the mission of the man of the end of time. The same work he already did at Carmel, making hearts turn around, but this time on the scale of the whole world. The man who asked God for fire so a people would return is sent at the end of time so that fathers and sons will return to one another and all together return to God. And there's a profound reason why God aims precisely there, at fathers and sons, and not at any other relationship in the world. Because in the Bible, faith does not travel through the blood. It is not inherited like the color of the eyes. It is transmitted, passed from one generation to the next, like someone passing a lit torch hand to hand, carefully so it doesn't go out along the way. The Father tells the Son who God is, what God did, why it's worth trusting him even when the night is long. And that Son one day, in his own words, tells it to his own. That is the invisible chain that keeps an entire nation alive before God, century after century. Now think about what happens when that chain breaks. When the father drifts away, when the son grows resentful, when they stop speaking, when in the same house there are two people who no longer look each other in the eye, the torch falls to the ground. And then an entire generation grows up in the dark, not knowing who God is, not always because it rejected him, but simply because no one passed it on. It went out in the gap between one heart and another. That's why reconciling fathers with sons is not merely healing wounded feelings, it's lighting the torch again. It's repairing the only bridge by which faith crosses from one era to the next. The prophet comes back to weld that chain again, link by link, before it's lost entirely and no one is left who remembers the way back. But why is it so urgent? Why does this have to happen before that day? Here's the part that's going to shake you. Because the sentence still isn't finished. God says why the herald has to do that, and the reason is a warning with its teeth bared. God says, "Lest I come and strike the earth with a curse." Lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. That is the last word of the Old Testament, literally. In the order in which most Bibles place it, that is the last line before 4 centuries of silence. And the Hebrew word that's translated there as curse is a tremendous word. The word is herem. And herem is not a may things go badly for you. Herem is total destruction. It's what is devoted entirely to ruin, what is consecrated to be wiped out with nothing left. It's the heaviest word the language has for annihilation. And don't lose sight of the other half of that sentence, because the two halves are stitched together. God doesn't speak of just any day. He speaks of the day of the Lord, great and terrible. That expression, the day of the Lord, runs through nearly all the prophets, and in all of them it means the same thing. The moment when God finally intervenes without a filter, without intermediaries, in person, to judge the world and put each thing in its place. One of the prophets described it as a day of darkness and not of light, of gloom without any brightness. Another painted it as the man who flees from a lion and, just when he thinks he saved himself, runs straight into a bear. It's great because God shows himself at last in all his glory, unveiled. And it's terrible for exactly the same reason, because no one can hold that glory head-on with a crooked heart. The light that heals the one who is clean burns the one who is dirty. That is the day drawing near at the end of the book, and right before naming it, in the last breath of the Old Testament, God inserts Elijah, like someone posting a guardian at the door before the storm breaks. Do you understand the full scene now? The Old Testament, all of it, the law, the prophets, the Psalms, 1,500 years of history with God, does not end with an embrace. It ends with a raised sword. It ends with the word herem hanging in the air. And the only thing that stands between that sword and the earth is a man who turns hearts back. Elijah is the break. He is the hand God lays on his own sword. If the hearts come back, the curse does not fall. If fathers and sons reconcile, if the people return, the great and terrible day arrives as a great day, and not as a terrible day. That's why he sends him. That's why he keeps that man alive for millennia. Not for the spectacle, for the mercy. It's the last chance before the end, and I want you to stop here with me, because this isn't just ancient theology. Imagine for a second your own family. Imagine that relationship that went cold, that father and that son who've gone years without saying what they really feel, that chair that in your house is also half empty in a certain sense. The Bible is telling you that the first thing God wants to fix before the end is not politics, nor empires, nor armies. It's that. It's the table in your house. It's the heart between the generations. Tell me one thing, and I want you to actually write it to me in the comments. No dressing it up. Is there a heart in your life that needs to come back? A father, a son, someone you grew distant from? Write it down, even if it's a single word, because this whole video is about exactly that, about returning, and sometimes putting it into words is the first step of the return. I read you. I really do read you. Now then, so far we have the promise. But notice what happens immediately after God pronounces it, because it's chilling. After saying that name, Elijah, and that word, curse, God falls silent. And not for a little while. He falls silent for 400 years. The last thing the people of Israel hear from the mouth of their God is that promise and that threat, and then nothing. 100 years pass, 200, 300, 400 years without a single prophet, without a single voice rising up and saying, "Thus says the Lord." And the empires take turns on top of them. The Greeks come and conquer the known world. Then the Romans come with their legions, and heaven stays closed, mute, in absolute silence. And in all that darkness, what do you think the people were doing? Waiting for Elijah. Because when the one who says goodbye leaves you a last promise, that promise becomes the only thing you cling to while the night lasts. Fathers taught it to their sons, and those sons to theirs. One day, before the great day, the prophet of fire will return. The waiting became a habit. The habit became a tradition. And that hope is still alive today, this very year, and not locked away in a dusty book, but in concrete gestures you can see with your own eyes. I'm talking about the Jewish people. For Jewish tradition, the promise of Malachi was never fulfilled. The prophet has not come yet, and that's why they still wait for him, not as an abstract idea, but as a guest who might knock on the door this very night. And they prepared 2 chairs, so to speak, for him. The first is the one I mentioned to you at the beginning. Imagine a birth. A Jewish boy is 8 days old, and the moment comes for the covenant of circumcision, the ceremony that marks the child as part of the people of God. And in that ceremony, in a corner, a special chair is placed. A beautiful chair, sometimes carved, sometimes covered in velvet. And no one, absolutely no one, sits in it. It is the chair of Elijah. They place it because a very ancient tradition says that Elijah, the prophet who defended God's covenant when all Israel was abandoning it, is present at every covenant that is renewed. So at every birth, at every child who enters the alliance, there is a seat reserved for the man who returns, empty, waiting. Think about that the next time you hear that the Bible is a dead book. There are empty chairs waiting for the prophet at this very moment, on this very day, in homes all over the world. And the second waiting is at the most important dinner of the year, Passover. Imagine the table, the candles lit, the unleavened bread, the family gathered, the cup of wine at each place. And in the center of the table there is one more cup, a full cup poured to the brim that no one is going to drink. It is the cup of Elijah. And at a certain moment of the dinner, someone, almost always a child, gets up and goes to open the door of the house. They open it wide, out into the night, out into the dark, cold street. Why? So the prophet can come in. Because tradition says Elijah will come on a Passover to announce that the Messiah at last has arrived. So every year they open the door. Every year they look out into the darkness. Every year the cup stays full and the chair stays empty, and even so, the following year they open the door again. That is the most stubborn hope on the planet. And in Jewish thought, the Tishbite doesn't come only to reconcile families. He comes to resolve. There's a beautiful idea in the writings of the sages. When 2 rabbis argued over the law and couldn't reach agreement, when the debate ended in a tie and no one could decide who was right, they left the question open with an expression that means, more or less, let it stand until Elijah comes. The prophet in that tradition is the one who arrives at the end and clears up everything left unanswered. The one who unties the knots. The one who reconciles not only people, but the truths that seem to be fighting each other. The great reconciler before the great day. So on the Jewish side, the answer to our question is clear and beautiful. Why will God bring Elijah back? To announce the Messiah, to reconcile the families, and to resolve what was left broken and unanswered. That is the herald, that is the one who runs ahead of the king. But then, if that's the Jewish hope, the Christian part comes in, and this is where the whole story twists and becomes, honestly, one of the most fascinating puzzles in the entire Bible. Because the New Testament opens by saying practically that Elijah already came, that the waiting ended, that the herald already ran ahead of the king, and yet it leaves open a door that no one has completely closed. Let's look at it carefully, step by step, because every sentence matters. It all begins before John the Baptist was born. An angel appears to his father, a priest named Zechariah, inside the temple and announces that he's going to have a son. And he describes who that son will be with words any Jew would have recognized instantly. The angel says the boy will go before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers toward the children. Did you hear it? To turn the hearts of the fathers toward the children. It's the line from Malachi. It's the mission of Elijah, word for word. The angel is quoting the last verse of the Old Testament and saying that which God promised is fulfilled in this child, and there's a detail in the language that makes it even more precise. Remember the Hebrew word shav, to return. Well, the New Testament is not written in Hebrew, it's written in Greek. And the verb the angel uses there for to turn the hearts is the Greek verb epistrepho. Epistrepho means to turn around, to return, to turn toward. It's the exact Greek echo of that Hebrew shav. So the bridge between the two testaments is built with a single idea, said in two languages: turn the heart back, shav in the Hebrew of Malachi, epistrepho in the Greek of Luke. The same mission crossing the centuries and two languages to fall upon a single child in the desert. And the child grows and becomes John the Baptist and goes out into the desert dressed in camel hair and a leather belt. Does that clothing sound familiar? It's exactly the description of how Elijah dressed. The Bible describes him as a hairy man, girded with a belt of leather. And it describes John the same way. It's no accident. It's a sign. John appears dressed like Elijah, speaking like Elijah, calling the people to return like Elijah. Everything points to the same place. And think about what that meant for the people of his time. After 400 years without a single prophet, after 4 centuries in which God had not addressed a word to anyone, suddenly there's a voice shouting in the desert on the bank of the Jordan River, and the people feel it in their bones. They begin to come out of Jerusalem. They come out of all the villages of Judea. Whole crowds go down toward the water because something in the air tells them the silence has finally been broken, that God has spoken again. Imagine the dust of the road, the lines of people descending toward the river under the sun, the expectation trembling in each one's stomach, and that rough man, planted in the water, hammers them with a single message, a single word without ornament: return. Change your course, turn around, because the king is about to arrive. And what was the word underneath all of it? The same as always. The same call that was shouted on the top of Carmel centuries earlier, now echoing on the bank of a river, coming out of the mouth of another man dressed in the same skins. Those who had eyes to see understood it perfectly. The herald had arrived. Somehow, against all logic, Elijah was back. And then Jesus himself comes and says it in so many words. Speaking to the crowd about John, the Master declares without hedging, "He is the Elijah who was to come. He is the Elijah who was to come." That's it. Full stop, it would seem. John is the promised Elijah. The waiting ended, and in case any doubt remained, there's another even more direct scene. After a glorious moment on the top of a mountain, the disciples ask Jesus why the teachers of the law say the prophet has to come first. And Jesus responds something astonishing. He says that Elijah already came, but that they didn't recognize him, and that they did with him whatever they wanted. And the text adds that the disciples understood he was speaking to them about John the Baptist. Already came. They didn't recognize him. They killed him, in fact, because John was beheaded. Elijah already came, and the world didn't realize it. Case closed, you'd say. But this is where the puzzle breaks in your hands, because there's a verse that complicates everything. When John the Baptist, in person, at the peak of his fame, is sent an official delegation of priests to ask him who he is, they ask him the direct question. They ask him without hedging, "Are you Elijah?" And John answers, and his answer is a single word. John says, "I am not. I am not." John himself denies being Elijah, and here you have to be honest and look at the tension head-on without covering it up, because it's in the text and it can't be erased. Jesus says John is Elijah. John says he is not Elijah, both in the same Bible. How can that be? And the answer that keeps honesty with the text, is that both things are true, because they're talking about two different questions. John answers the literal question. They ask him, "Are you Elijah, the same man who went up to heaven in the whirlwind, who came back in person?" And John says, quite rightly, "No, I am not that man. I was born of Zechariah and of Elizabeth. I didn't come down from any chariot of fire." And he's right. Literally, John was not Elijah. But Jesus answers a different question. Jesus is saying that John fulfilled the role of Elijah, that he did the work of Elijah, that he came in the spirit and power of Elijah, as the angel had announced. There's a Greek word that helps to understand this. The word is typos. A typos is a type, a model, a figure that represents another, like the seal that leaves its shape in the wax. John was the typos of Elijah, the figure, the fulfillment in spirit. Not the man in flesh and blood, but the same office embodied in another person. Elijah came, in the sense that mattered. The mission came, the voice that calls to return came, the herald who prepares the way came. And with this, you'd think the matter is entirely resolved, that the prophet was John, and that's that. But notice something that almost no one underlines, and that to me seems one of the most impressive things in the whole New Testament. In that same conversation, after John had already been born, had already preached, and had already died beheaded, Jesus doesn't speak only in the past. Listen very carefully to how he begins his answer. Before saying Elijah already came, Jesus says, in the present and in the future, truly Elijah comes first and will restore all things. Elijah comes and will restore all things. Jesus says it when John is already dead and buried. If Elijah were only John, and John was already gone, why does the Master use the future tense? Why does he say comes and will restore, as if something were still yet to happen? And here appears the biggest word of this video, because will restore all things is a single word in Greek, and it's an enormous word. The word is apokatastasis, and apokatastasis means the complete restoration, the return of everything to its original state, the total repair of the cosmos. It's to give the entire universe back to how it should have been, before everything broke. It's not reconciling a family, it's reconciling everything. It's that same idea that appears when the apostle preaches in the book of Acts that heaven must receive Christ until the times of the restoration of all things. The same word, apokatastasis, the great return of everything to God. And here's the detail that seals the whole argument, and that almost no one has ever noticed. When the promise of Malachi was translated from Hebrew into Greek centuries before Jesus was born, in the version the Jews of his time read, "Do you know what word the translators chose to say, 'turn the heart of the fathers back'? They chose that same one, the root of apokatastasis, to restore. That is to say, the restoration of all things that Jesus announces on that mountain is, letter for letter, the same restoration of hearts that Malachi had promised in the last line of the Old Testament. The Greek of the Old Testament and the mouth of Jesus use exactly the same verb. The promise of the last prophet and the promise of the Messiah, deep down, were always one and the same. And then the answer to the riddle becomes luminous. The herald came once in the typos in the figure of John to prepare the first coming of the Messiah, to call the people to return before the Lamb appeared. That was the first fulfillment, but the promise has a second layer, still open, pointing to the great and terrible day that has not yet arrived, when the King comes a second time, no longer as a lamb, but as a judge. And before that day, according to Jesus' own words in the future tense, there is a restoration, an apokatastasis, a last turning of the hearts, already came and comes. The two that seem to be fighting now shake hands. They don't contradict each other, they take turns. And let me show you one more thing, because it's going to give you goosebumps. That same Elijah who went up alive who didn't taste death, appears one more time in the New Testament in the flesh, standing, speaking. Imagine the scene. Jesus climbs a high mountain and takes 3 of his disciples with him. And up there, set apart from everything before their eyes, the Master's face begins to shine like the sun, and his clothes turn white as light, so white that no launderer on earth could match them. And in the middle of that radiance, 2 men appear, conversing with him. One was Moses, and the other was Elijah. There he was, alive, the man who left in the whirlwind, centuries and centuries later, standing on a mountain, speaking with the Messiah face to face. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a memory. It was him, in person, kept, as I told you, on pause, waiting. And there's a detail in who those 2 were that is no coincidence, and that many readers have pointed out over the centuries. Moses was the man of the law, the one who received the commandments on another mountain, amid thunder. And the other represented all the prophets, the voice that called the people to return. Together, those 2 are usually understood as the representation of everything God had said until then, the law and the prophets, standing, bearing witness, both pointing toward the same man who shone in the center. And the disciples, terrified, not knowing what to say, stammer something about building 3 shelters to stay there. But then a cloud covers them, and from the cloud comes a voice that puts everything in its place. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. Not Moses, not Elijah. Him. And when the cloud clears, the 2 men have disappeared, and Jesus is left alone. The veil had been drawn back for just an instant, and 3 men saw with their own eyes that the one God promises to bring back is not a legend nor a symbol. He is someone who already let himself be seen once, and who is still waiting for his turn. Now then, I have to be honest with you about one thing. Because on this channel I don't sell you smoke. Many people, when they get here, jump immediately to a book at the end of the Bible, Revelation, where 2 witnesses appear in the last days with a very particular power. One of those powers is to close the sky so it doesn't rain during the time of their prophecy. And anyone who knows the story of Elijah remembers right away, because Elijah's great miracle was exactly that, to close the sky so that not a drop of rain would fall for 3.5 years over all Israel. The coincidence is so strong that a great many readers over the centuries have thought that one of those 2 witnesses of the end is Elijah in person, returned at last to fulfill the promise of Malachi. And it could be. It's an ancient and reasonable reading. But I want you to be clear about it, because it's the difference between what the Bible says and what people deduce. The text of Revelation never says the name. It never writes Elijah. It describes 2 witnesses with powers that recall Elijah and also Moses, but it doesn't identify them. So it's an interpretation, a very interesting one, but an interpretation, not an affirmation. I present it to you, and I leave you to think it over, because that's what God gave you a head for. What the Bible does affirm in so many words is the Malachi passage, I am sending you Elijah, and what Jesus said in so many words in the future. Elijah comes and will restore all things. That's not deduction, that's text. So then, after all this journey, after the name that means, my God is the Lord, after Mount Carmel, after the whirlwind, after the empty chair and the full cup, after John, who was and wasn't, after the word apokatastasis, let's return to the question we started with, the question of the title, why will God bring Elijah back? And I want the answer to land on you now with all its weight, because it completely changes what you thought this video was going to say. Think about everything God could have promised to send before the end of the world. He could have promised an army of angels. He could have promised fire, plagues, signs in the sun and in the moon. He could have promised a conquering king. And of all the things he could have chosen to send before the greatest and most terrible day in history, do you know what he chose? He chose to send a man to fix hearts, to turn the heart of the fathers toward the children, to reconcile the families, to make a people with a heart split in two turn around and come back home, because that is the truth that was hidden from the very first line, and that you can now see whole. The last word of the Old Testament is Hiram, total destruction, but God doesn't want that to be the last word of your story, and that's why he placed in front of the sword a man whose only weapon is to turn hearts back. Elijah doesn't come back to fight the war. Elijah comes back so the war won't be necessary. He comes back so that when the king appears, he finds hearts that already returned, families that already reconciled, a people that already turned around. He comes back so the great day will be great and not terrible. That's why God kept him alive. That's why he didn't let him die. That's why there's an empty chair at every covenant and a full cup at every Passover. Because the heart of God, from the first page to the last, is not looking for someone to destroy. It's waiting for someone to bring back. And he kept a whole man for millennia on pause, just to have someone ready at the last moment to run through the world shouting what his own name always shouted, that your God is the Lord, and that still, it is not too late to return. And here's what I want you to take away beyond the story, beyond the centuries and the languages and the ancient names. The question at the beginning was why God will bring Elijah back. But underneath that question, there was another quieter one aimed at you. Because this whole story, from the fire of Carmel to the cup of Passover, revolves around a single word that God repeats tirelessly throughout the whole Bible. Return, come back, turn around and walk back home. God moved heaven and earth, kept a man alive for millennia, wrote the last line of an entire testament, so that there would always be, until the very last instant, a way back left open. And if God did all that for an entire people, think about what he's willing to do for a single heart that decides to return. For yours, today, without waiting for any profit. The chair is still empty. The cup is still full. The door opens every year out into the night. And somewhere we don't know, kept since the day of the whirlwind, a man dressed in skins waits for the signal to return and to turn back. One heart at a time, yours included, before heaven speaks for the last time. Hey, stick around one more second, this matters. If you made it this far, all the way to the real end, you already know that here we don't do things halfway. And that only holds up if you give the channel that push. So leave me the like. It costs nothing, and it tells me it was worth putting together. And don't leave yet. Because there on the screen I've left you another video that connects with this one in a way you're going to like. I won't tell you what it's about. But if what happened today moved something inside you, that one is going to move it twice as much. Come on, I'll see you on the other side.